It wasn't until my 4th playthrough of Persona 4 Golden that I finally really sat in and listened to Naoki Konishi's words through his social link. I always avoided or never finished his link because of something about the multiple wasted days just to start the social link and his general wood elf appearance being off-putting to me, which is totally unfair and only cheapening the experience for myself. But it was then, after I had spent so many hundreds of hours playing the Persona series and honestly still enjoying it an absolute ton, that I finally had a moment again to feel like I understood Persona for the first time. The period I was in when I first played Persona 5 on PS3 in 2019 of May was a twisting, constant turmoil of uncertain anxiety, following the divorce of my parents and my dropping out of college 2 months prior, and my relying on YouTube to try and make something of myself so I didn't die of some meth overdose working at Sonic a handful of years down the line. It wasn't Persona necessarily that changed any of that in my life, of course. Persona is still a game. It's media. It was dedication and work, a bunch of luck, and some extremely reckless persistence that got me where I was. Primarily unrelated to Persona, you could maybe even say, but the reflective nature of the characters that let me understand new, unique perspectives on real human situations drove me emotional so many times on understanding my own life's experience. I remember the first time playing Persona 5 when Futaba hugged me at the end of her link and inexplicably noted to herself that she was crying, even though she was happy, for finally conquering her anxiety and having a person to rely on, for not wanting to die anymore. I remember bawling at that scene, and so many scents in Persona have brought me to tears and reinvigorated the joy in me that is to continue living and trying. Everything gets old, though, and after I had begun to think that I had scrubbed this series for all its best personal moments, as late as September of 2021, Naoki Konishi made me bawl again. The reason I mention this and give such a big forward and context where I haven't done on any of the other segments is because it was actually his story that made me want to do an analysis on him specifically, but I knew that not enough people would see it. Not enough would appreciate it. So, in a way, it was that moment that inspired me to make the first true semi-comprehensive analysis of Persona 4 Golden. At least as much as I could think to do, and definitely more than currently exists, at least in video form. But I've seen the Japanese side of the internet, and I'd take that for in general as well. Not just recapping the story 80% of the time with an occasional non-analytical opinion thrown in, or not just rambling some half-constructed review for 40 minutes throwing in jokes that actively contradict details of the story with some positives and negatives listed for a standard video analysis these days. I wanted to do a proper analysis. And if this is by chance the first video in the series that you're seeing, I'm sure this sounds totally weird and like way out of left field or like overly arrogant, and I really don't intend that, so I'll explain. This video is one part of a now over 40-part series dissecting every character, storyline, mythological background, theme, sub-theme, and story beat that I could draw significance from. And so if this is your first or not, I want to say I'm personally really glad you're here, early or late. So let's get to Naoki. Here's a fun bit of trivia. Who are the first 10 characters you meet in Inaba? Dojima, Nanako, Marie in Golden, the gas attendant, wink wink, maybe a nameless NPC or two, but before you even get to Dojima's house, for the first time, when he gives you the opportunity to walk around because Nanako realizes that you seem sick, and you don't realize it, but you meet Naoki and Saki Konishi. This is the only time they are ever seen in the game together. The only raw, momentary minute you can capture their lives personally before death rips them along other sides of the river for the rest of Naoki's numbered life. And what they say alludes to one of the most significant lines in Persona 4 Golden for me. But this isn't all about me, believe it or not. It's about Naoki. So, for now, put a pin in that. Shelve that. We'll be getting back to it later. Naoki Konishi is the brother of the second murder victim in Inaba, which is probably how he, in Inaba, has gotten used to being referred to as. But as he no doubt yearns for acknowledgement of more than just that. Naoki Konishi is a brother and a son, the son of the family Konishi liquors store in the North Shopping District, that, like many other shops in Inaba, is having a hard time financially surviving, with the supercenter Junes having moved into town roughly a year before the player character Yu begins his story. Unlike many local businesses, they've managed to stay afloat just barely while being unable to keep up with the options and prices presented at Junes. Naoki Konishi is Saki's junior and helps out with the nurse's office at the Yasu Inaba High School, in which he also attends. His outside nature is generally standoffish, not overtly friendly or trusting, not that he thinks lowly of others, but that he doesn't warm easily to them. He has a negative impression of what people's intents or thoughts may be. When people's intent seems skewed or inauthentic, aside from his social link and school appearances, he is nearly entirely absent from the main story, which I think contributes to his feeling of standoffishness and self-isolation. But he's so much more than that, as we come to find out. Naoki Konishi's story, I'd say in a nutshell, is about a unique struggle to understand his own personal grief when it doesn't line up with the truth about a grieving son that he's seen in TV and movies, and his journey to accept what happened in his own way before grabbing his own life and learning to live as himself again. You initially meet Naoki when King Moron forces you to assist in the nurse's office in June. You find out they asked for assistance in order to not burden Naoki while he grieves. This claustrophobic, pitying atmosphere is exuded from all of them for a bit, going on about how he can't be helped and Naoki needs to be left alone before Naoki walks in and apologizes for being late. The atmosphere immediately changes whenever he comes in, and they essentially shoo him away, saying he doesn't need to push himself and he can focus more on the family business instead. Not stating the obvious reason, but making the reason obvious nonetheless. When he says he doesn't want to be the only one not doing anything, they throw him on cleaning duty with you, and then they quickly leave. It's clear they're avoiding him like the plague, maybe out of giving him room, but this really just seems like an excuse not to make themselves uncomfortable or accidentally say something that hits a wrong nerve. They don't want to envelop themselves in his grief that they have perceived. He immediately introduces himself to you, then mentions how you must have knew his sister and affirms that you're friends with Yosuke before saying he hates you and asking to leave after all. Having you do all of the work, despite him offering to help, this initially seems really unreasonable and rude, and I think puts a lot of people off from actively trying to pursue him, which you have to do more than any other link if you want to actually get to know him. This really, though, is explained and elaborated on later, and through context clues you might be able to already form a decent guess for how and why he feels this way, given who he is, and how Yosuke is perceived in regards to Junes in the shopping district. Combined with knowing at this point that Saki didn't like Yosuke, it's hard to know how much Naoki was told by his now-gone sister. The second push to link with Naoki is an event where the infirmary members are called to help. If you say, "Let's go," he bluntly refuses and says he'll go alone. But irritatingly, a student comes up to tell you you have the role of filling for an absent member in again, despite the absent member Naoki standing right next to you. In the infirmary, people are complaining about being drafted in whenever they had other after-school plans, and how Naoki has things easy now because he can avoid responsibility, which is, weird on multiple levels. They are part of the reason that he has it easy, because they shoo him away whenever he shows up, and then the obvious death being way harder of a burden than some after-school chores. Then the gossiping escalates. You are given the option to reproach them, and hopefully you do. They're being stupid after all, but after that Naoki steps in implying that he's heard all of it, and says that it's fine. Once he comes back in, the mood changes. He realizes nobody is going to act normally, so he leaves, causing the team members to resume work like clockwork. All of this is meant to drive home Naoki's perception among peers and in the town of Inaba within school. This sort of double-sided jealousy and crushing pity that he never asked or leaned in to receive either of. After seeing that Naoki had been hanging around outside by himself out of some feeling of obligation not to get off with the free time when others don't, paints this picture of someone who is intentionally trying to treat himself as he views as fair because nobody else seems to want to hold him to it. We haven't started his social link officially yet, and we already are seeing this yearning to re-normalize his life, at least in how he's perceived, because being left alone out of pity is still being left alone. It's lonely, and it's cruel. As if out of some test to you and himself, or some feeling that he helped after all, he spots some dirt on your shirt after cleaning and offers you a handkerchief. He almost opens up to you, but backs down, deciding to remain at school longer, possibly referring to him wanting to not confront his home and parents, where things are still feeling awkward. This handkerchief, though, is the final push you need to start the link. Upon returning the handkerchief to Naoki, he's left with some surprise, stating that you could have thrown it out, but obviously only a bad person would borrow a handkerchief, an umbrella, a textbook, the list goes on, and throw it out. That's because you're supposed to be a bad person, someone Naoki can direct his hate towards, and that's your side of the test. Naoki is now forced to recognize that you are at least a half-decent person, and gives him the excuse not to hate you. You treating him fairly by asking him to come with you to the infirmary, and you letting him leave when he asked, showed him that you neither pity nor disregard him, neither side of the double-edged blade. So finally, he feels comfortable, maybe daring to open up to you. Something people often attempt to lampshade Persona with as a whole is the criticism that in Persona, everyone just randomly chooses you as a stranger, that you're the best thing in life since sliced bread, and somehow through the basic platitudes and useless remarks or jokes, you can somehow change the perspective on their life entirely. But while this isn't totally absent from literally every social link, I think this shows the sheer extent that the story is willing to go as carefully as this encounter in order to show how your significance does make sense. And Naoki is this key example. People criticize Persona for repeating ad nauseum the same information over and over, but when the writing does savor itself in subtlety, they miss the point entirely. And I'm aware that this technical person that I'm criticizing is more of an amalgamation of criticism I've seen shifted to Persona rather than necessarily a single existing person, but I still don't think this is a straw man. There are people out there who display this inane lack of reading comprehension and hot takeifying of real artists' hard work and talent. But even if I'm aware, I thought that it was worth bringing up and refuting, as Naoki is the perfect example of this complexity, and he's not an exception. Not only as a person, written by people as this segment is made to primarily discuss, but also as a character, cleverly written with unique narrative devices and for the medium that he's present for. And hey, this is an analysis after all. I'm at least attempting to be thorough. Back to where we were. Naoki makes a number of excuses for not needing the handkerchief anymore. From his mother accidentally slipping it into his bag, to no one using it anymore, to it being better for someone like you to get use out of it. But his quick run-through of all these different ideas shows his lack of commitment to really any excuse. He just doesn't want it back, because of what it represents, and its reminder of the situation. This also is kind of a metaphor for himself as well, as he shows that he wants to return to some sort of normalcy where he can serve purpose in people's lives and not be looked down upon as a grieving brother whose sister was murdered. He is in a sense pushing that feeling onto the handkerchief that also had been branded as the dead girl's handkerchief. And nobody wants that thing anymore. It's left without use for the purpose that it was made. Still, like I said before my analytical offshoot, he realizes this means that you are a good person, and does end up thanking you, perhaps the first time that you've seen him smile thus far. He apologizes for saying that he hated you, and is grateful that you didn't choose to hold it against him. Really, I think he's grateful to you that you hadn't given up on him yet. And after that, he essentially affirms the implied feelings of the previous encounters that I had already run through, and mentions being left behind again. Something that assures us that despite wanting to return to normalcy, it's not out of callousness or a lack of care for his sister, that he did love and care for his sister, but that'll be expanded upon later as well. He ends it finally suggesting that you two might be able to have fun hanging out sometime. So, the Hanged Man is in motion. Actually, saying it like that sounds a bit too dark. The next social link is in Aya, somewhere multiple important social links will be spent with Naoki. This link essentially establishes how Naoki loves eating there, but had been avoiding it since his sister died, and for all of the reasons therein. First, we get passing mention of people staring at him, which is reinforced later as another way that the pity for him has seemingly unknowingly been turned into pressure for his unhappiness. If they see him being happy even though his sister has died, they'll think badly of him, and every time they're around, they're always looking at him. He mentions how he has nothing to do at home, nothing to help with at the liquor store, being as young as he is. It gives insight into the performative nature of the obligatory kindness that he's being offered. And he mentions people coming in and sobbing, try to offer consolation, even though they never once dared talk to his sister before she died. But then, despite that, they feel the right to give empty advice to him, like, "You should live for her sake," which isn't empty because of the quality of the words, but from whom they come from. It's honestly such a mature look at so many aspects of the grieving process and societal responses when that is mixed with a twisted sense of infamy, especially in a town where not much else happens and everyone wants to be a part of the story. It's really twisted when you take time to think about it like that, which he does. But it's also wholly natural. A really good quote I like from this rank is, "Living is hard, huh? Even though we're already going through it, it's like we're still learning." Since the social link and everything surrounding Naoki has been pretty heavy so far, the next rank opts to focus more on Naoki's normal side, finally getting us to see what sort of guy he is, separated from the dead girl's brother. He tells a story about his friend messing with a teacher and him botching an apology because of the ridiculous reaction his actions caused being too funny to be remorseful about. And then he realizes that it's been a while since he kicked back like this and just enjoyed himself. Then the social link burns in the idea of being watched, the previous social link only mentioned in passing, with judgmental housewives, which, by the way, are the worst people in Persona 4. Like, holy crap, if there was ever someone who was wrong in Persona 4, it's the housewives. Then again, that's sort of just like a general stereotype of the gossiping housewife that you see pretty much everywhere, anywhere, all the time. Still though, like they're just making everyone feel bad all the time, but they reiterate this idea in Naoki that he isn't allowed to be happy. That feeling that he needs to suffer and grieve and never experience joy in a twisted way to honor his sister's memory. Even making assumptions about his family and the relationship he had with his sister, just because he dares to smile in public. It hurts. The next social link shows another thing that he mentioned briefly in rank 2. Someone who barely knows him and his family coming up to him and giving him advice on the way to live his life. But it's so judgmental, like she's his parent or something. This brings something to his character, though, that we haven't been able to see yet, and sets up another upcoming link and struggle, showing that there's actually a lot of similarity in Yosuke and Naoki's struggle. Someone that Naoki at this time believes that he hates. That is the fact that, due to his parents running a business, especially one that is struggling, he has to just take the judgment and abuse. He can never stand up for himself. He can never tell people to just back off. It has a risk of harming his whole family line's business, his job, his placement, his parents' ability to make money. So not only is he subject to the lie on how grieving is supposed to work forcefully, but his hands are also tied when it comes to confronting the people pushing this lie onto him. You originally planned to eat at Aya, but with the mood ruined, you part for the day. The weirdest social link for Naoki is when you eat at Aya next. He starts with a bombshell, thinking about quitting school, that of course he decides later against. He just feels so isolated, like he's not doing anything or being allowed to do anything, and the town keeps judging every path that he takes, so this represents, for a moment, his faltering, and he reconsiders trying to lighten the hardships by going along with the lie, and appeasing the thoughts of those unrelated parties. It's also the first time he directly and openly talks about his sister's death, but it's not honest. It seems regretful, at least toward the impact of her passing, and how that impact on the lives of him and his family have gone, rather than him talking about the things you would imagine were more important, like the missed opportunities for everyone involved. Thankfully, when you return to Aya with him again, Naoki has no vested interest in quitting school or taking over the liquor shop. He talked with his parents, and they made it clear to him that they want him to pursue his own path in life, not just what he feels obligated towards. They accuse him of running away from school because he just doesn't like it, and while it's true that he faltered for a moment, it blindsides Naoki because it makes him realize how his eyes started to haze over. He's not like that. He says, "If I needed to run, I could do it forever," saying it's possible, due to everyone's quote-unquote kindness, that he's allowed to drift by in his life right now. But he doesn't want that. Doing whatever you want for classes or clubs may sound nice, but when none of his actions have consequences, when no one tries to correct him on being right or wrong, when no one asks for his help, when they don't realize that they're removing his very purpose in life, like he doesn't exist at all, or like when Saki Konishi died, he became her ghost, like he's the one who died? He briefly faltered, but now he's back to a recommitment. He doesn't have an answer, but he pleads with you and himself a gaggle of questions on what he should do. He doesn't want to be even more isolated and alone. He doesn't want people to hate him, but he wants them to at least act like he's breathing the same air. He just wants to be treated fair. To Naoki, this breed of kindness is an unending cruelty. Okay, here it is. The rank that made me finally decide to undertake this giant analysis project. The progenitor, the seed of all of these months of work. Something that I think is one of the most profound and grounded takes on grief that I've ever heard analogized. Naoki apologizes for being so heavy last time, then quickly thanks you for not forcing your own ideas on him, for not being around him just out of pity, for letting him be human. He's shown himself to be a bit of an edgy troublemaker with his previous funny stories that he shared, but here he shows a more low-key side of himself by letting you know that he loves cream puffs, which in Japan are something seen as a girl's food. He talks about an intimate experience that at one point probably seemed like normal everyday life that displayed a very natural portrayal of siblings at that age. And I should know, having a younger sister. He talks about buying cream puffs and leaving them in the fridge for later, but then finding Saki to have eaten them often. My sister is like Naoki, who is also the younger sibling, and she did the same thing growing up, and would get so angry when someone touched her food or drink, despite the fact that most of the time she would never touch it in the fridge, and sometimes months would go by with an open can or 20-ounce bottle of soda just sitting there in the fridge. The soda long went flat. Everyone knew that she'd eventually throw it out, but she didn't want to waste it and would leave it there forever. There is a few cases with food, like wedding cake or noodles or whatnot, that would be kept in a sealed container in the back of the fridge, only to find it once it had visibly molded on from the inside of the container. I remember sneaking bites of some food after she didn't eat them for a day or so, because I knew that it would be going bad otherwise, but leaving some because I didn't think she would notice, and she often didn't. So yeah, very realistic depiction of siblings, I think, here. He brings up that she would make some typical dumb excuse for her eating his stuff, like, "I ate them since they were about to expire," which would lead to typical dumb sibling arguments, which, to be fair, those were his cream puffs. It's not like it's her place to eat them. I'm totally on Naoki's side here, but this is where I think the link gets beautiful. He says now, the cream puffs don't disappear. He's bought some recently, and they didn't expire in the fridge.
When I saw that, I thought, maybe Sis isn't here anymore, you know? So I threw them away.
This was so poignant to me. People say sometimes grief doesn't hit you immediately. Sometimes you block it out and you don't truly conceptualize what it means for people to be gone until some mundane event sets it off. Like this idea absolutely breaks me. When I was growing up, my grandmother repeated a story a few times to me on the day that she realized her dad was dead. She talked about how, due to her being the responsible one in the family, she organized and put the whole funeral together herself, did a speech, shook hands. She was sad, but she never cried. It was a weird feeling to her, but I think she accepted it at the time, for herself at least, that he just went to heaven, and so it's not something to be sad over. She had a great relationship with her father as well. She often told me growing up that she sees so much of her dad in me, his sense of humor and his mannerisms. I always wondered what it would have been like to meet the guy, but something he really loved was fishing. He would go out on the boat before I was born and go fishing with my dad and my grandma and her sisters and their husbands or whoever wanted to, and have these nice little boat trips on the lake. They tried for a few years after his death to keep it going. I remember my sister and I going a few times when we were extremely young, but my grandma told me that the moment she realized that he was truly gone was when she made an offhanded comment while preparing the boat to get on the lake. She called out to her husband and asked if he had called her dad yet to see if he was almost there. After she realized what she'd said, she started bawling her eyes out. A whole year had gone by, and finally it hit her, down to something that defined in so many years of her life. That is death. That is grief. It's not always dramatic or immediate. It doesn't always make sense or hit us how we expect it to. I cry all the time when I watch movies and TV or play video games, but it took me over a month to cry over my parents' divorce. You rarely see that sort of thing, though, portrayed so well in media. This type of grief that is a slow burn, because movies and shows have to fit a runtime. They have to keep the attention, and for many, this form of grief seems foreign. But Naoki Konishi captured here more than I ever expected, in as something stupid as cream puffs, but that's how it is. Oh, maybe sis isn't here anymore. There's no one to eat them, so they need to be thrown out before the mold sets in. He asked himself what would be best for his sister and himself, and while you get the choice, the answer he reacts to well is to take action. Now that he's opened up to you about this, he finally seeks to resolve the different things weighing on him so he can take action, the actions he wants. The first thing is him finally seeing Junes for himself, finally understanding more about where Saki went, and another is him reconciling that someone he hates, and might continue to, Yosuke, actually has a lot in common with him. That even when he least expects it, he isn't truly alone. There are eyes out there who will watch him and take care of him, instead of judge and pity him. Then he visits the scene of her murder, and comes to terms with the fact that different people react to different grief, well, differently. That he's not a cruel person, an unloving person. The fact he didn't cry doesn't make him evil or wrong. That's just because he's not some TV character. But because of that, it doesn't make him immoral. His acceptance of this leads him to realize he was punishing himself as much as the outside world was crushing him with their kindness. He wasn't allowing himself to really think about Saki's passing. It felt better to avoid his feelings and tell himself that he's a bad person than explore them, but now that he has thought about it and opened up, the floodgates are opened. He admits that he wanted her to live more, that she probably wanted to live, that he should live for her, not because of some stupid housewife telling him, but because he loved his sister, and so he reached the final rank. When you meet him at the Samegawa River for his final rank, he's clearly done a lot of crying and reflecting on this past with his sister. He mentions a story about her crossing the river by being agile and jumping from rock to rock, and how he was too scared and stayed on the other side. When Saki would try brave new things, and he, as the younger of the siblings, was too scared, he would cry. He says it feels like that now. Sis has crossed the river, but he's still here. But no matter how much he cries or punishes himself over it, she's never coming back.
I've been trying not to think about it all this time. But I finally feel like I can face reality.
He thought that there was no point to his life, or direction. But he's been able to grasp a direction now, and feel hopeful knowing that someone out there is willing to devote time to him, to let him know that he mattered. He's going to work on unifying his family, and helping them move through the grief the best that he can. He's going to work hard in school, help out at the store when it's an option. He's going to do more, and help the loved and precious ones he still has. Back to trivia. You didn't forget, did you? The only interaction we see with Naoki and Saki at the beginning of the game, without portraits and without names, what are they saying? Hey, do you know where my snack went? I left it in the fridge, but it's gone. Oh, I ate it just now. I thought it was leftovers. What? No, it wasn't leftovers. I was making sure to save that for later. And so on. It mentions how it seems that they're having a sibling dispute. And this is just, honestly, chef's kiss for the writing of Persona 4. The fact that the 7th rank of an optional social link would be described and disguised in casual dialogue so early in the game is still one of the things I think you can't ever take from Persona 4's writing. It's one of those things that contributes to the idea of Inaba being a living world that I have another segment on. And the video is already out, by the way, so if you've liked this segment so far, please leave a like, comment, share, and check that video out afterwards. I really want more Persona fans to see this, so sharing it wherever they gather is obviously appreciated. I'm still trying my best with these videos, and that's Naoki. Someone burdened by the grief of his sister's passing, both by weighing expectations of his peers and his place in the town, and by himself through a self-hate over being sad the wrong way. Someone who learns not to punish their own happiness, to do their best to assist others, to honor the memory and keep carrying the torch from their side of the river. If you couldn't tell by the astronomical length of this individual segment, I felt that I had a lot to say, but we're still not done yet. So as you've seen with the previous segments, we're going to be addressing Naoki's Arcana, the Hanged Man, and try to apply the meanings that mirror him and his mentality and his growth. First, I should have clarified that the Hanged Man does not refer to a man being hanged, but a man simply hung upside down. This position often refers to inner peace and a meditative-like state, with things like the halo contributing to that feeling. The man part in Hebrew roots to a place that can also mean mind, so the idea of one's inner self, their mind being apart, suspended from the world below them, and seeing things from a place separate from themselves is important. You can see how this ties into Naoki with his views on grief. He's not evil or wrong to not grieve like those he's seen on TV and elsewhere, but in a negative way, he judges himself as being not a part of the world, and refuses to give merit to the real root of his feelings. The card also refers to entering a new phase in life, accompanied by sacrifice. As morbid as it is, this is actually pretty clear. He lost his sister and now has to find his new direction and new way forward, as this place he once knew is completely changed for him. This sacrifice is also linked to death, or rather death and sacrifice are used fairly interchangeably, as death is actually the next arcana after the Hanged Man. This one is going to sound kinda wacky, so I just had to throw it in here. Apparently, the legs make an upside-down cross, and the arms and head form a triangle. This is the symbol of sulfur in alchemy, and inverted as it is on the card, refers to the completion of one's self-transmutation. Obviously, these games and characters are all on some level about change and growth as a person, so it connects in a general way, but also the way that it was specifically represented on this card to me felt really hardcore. On the higher polarity, this card has to do with getting out of your own way, something Naoki did tremendously as he pushed everyone away and punished himself for something that ultimately wasn't wrong or his fault to begin with. In the lower polarity, it represents extreme anxiety and isolation, the belief that you only have yourself to rely on, and which also matches Naoki's loneliness, partly caused by the townspeople of Inaba around him and partly by himself. I hope you will, if you haven't already, turn on the bell and see all upcoming videos I have planned, still for release, on this huge analysis series going through all of Persona 4 Golden. I hope, again, that you'll grant me a like and a comment if you want to help assist my effort, and obviously financial help is critical and appreciated either through Patreon or on my Twitch through PayPal. Thanks so much again. I'll see you soon.